Hi everyone. In this video, I am trying something new. I am reviewing a Patreon's piece. This is my review of it, the overpay, and this is the original. In the original, one of the first things I noticed that I wanted to change were the inner contour lines. You can see them here, for example, between the skin and the underwear, between the breast and the torso, between the ball and the breast. You get the idea. For me, those lines are representing an occlusion shadow. Occlusion shadows are shadows that occur when you have two or more elements very close to each other. They are so close that they are creating a space that is very deep, sorry, and very small. And those two factors make the light, it does not matter where the light is coming from, but it makes that light very hard to enter those crevices. I think that's that's the correct term, crevices. So in the time lapse, you can see that one of the first things I did was replace those inner contour lines with a darker skin tone. That darker skin tone is the occlusion shadow. So that was my first task, or one of my first tasks in the review process. And you can see that in the final review overpay, those inner lines are almost entirely removed. Okay, let's go over another element, which is the skin. The skin for me is too desaturated, too grayish, and it has the highlight is not catching the blue color from the environment. You have to be very aware of the environment where your characters reside when you are rendering, when you are painting, because that background represents an environment, and that environment is bouncing light into the skin of your characters, into the clothing, into different elements of your piece. So you have to apply some of that color into the foreground elements. In this case, the character. So um, what I did, because I wanted to do an overhaul change, was to grab my curves and set it in the gamma, which is the default, and grab the inner, the starting point of this line and move it a bit to the right. If you notice, what what does that change does is to create a higher contrast. And not only it changes the contrast, but it also bumps up the saturation. That's why I like to use curves a lot, because it's like with one change, you do two in the color slider. And in the opposite side is also a good way to bump up the brightness and bump up the saturation too. I am doing a very quick demonstration of what I did in real time. So this address the saturation issue. You can see that the saturation is higher. The contrast is higher too. And with these changes applied, I went to the color balance, and in color balance, I set it first to highlight and move the slider to blue. You are going to see that the blue of the sky is getting too saturated, but that's because I grabbed just the body. But since I am doing a very quick demonstration of what I did in real time, you have to take that into, you have to keep that in mind. Anyway, let's move to the midtones. And here you are starting to see a different skin tone. You're starting to see how the blue of the sky is starting to change the skin color. And let's see, I think that's a good setting. You can see that the greenish tint of the skin is almost removed here. Obviously, what I did was something more careful. Let me try to show it here in the time lapse. You can see that at first I did that curve tint to change the saturation, change the brightness, and it was very late into the process that I changed the color, because I got too distracted with other things. That's why I did the demonstration, the quick demonstration before, because I wanted to show those two things: the change in saturation, the change in contrast, and also the change in color. Around here, you can see I started to use the color balance tool. Um, Both the curves and the color balance settings are tools that you will find in any drawing app. It doesn't matter, I am using Procreate, but you will notice those settings in Photoshop, in Krita, in Paint to Sci, in Clip Studio. It doesn't matter. Most major drawing applications have those settings because they are very, very useful. Okay, let's delete that quick layer demonstration, and let's go back to the origin. The balloon the ball, the beach ball that she is holding, it seemed to me too deflated. Obviously, it could be the case that the balloon is deflated, but if that was the case, it should be more vertically elongated. So I decided to inflate the balloon and just make a small pressure change in the hand and in the breast. So I tried to make the balloon more characteristic. That's why most of its shape is still preserved. You can see that it's mostly spherical. I only changed the contour where it make the most impact. I wanted to preserve that section here, mostly spherical, because if you zoom out, you can see that the balloon, the spherical nature of the balloon, it contributes to the silhouette of the character. So if went back to the original, the balloon does not quite contribute to the silhouette of the character. The shape is not as recognizable. It's not as quickly recognizable. So that's why I wanted to address that. Another thing that I did, and if you have seen my other videos, you might remember this, is that I like to give more purpose to my poses. If possible, add some narrative elements to the pose. So you can see that in the original, she has her right hand touching the side of her head, and it is not very clear what that hand is doing. It might be touching the side of her face. It might be touching the strand of hair. It might be touching the glasses. But if that is the case, I wanted to be very clear about it. That's why I changed the hand pose and bring the fingers to the foreground and make that action very evident to the viewer. Okay, because that, as I was mentioning, that tells a story. It makes the action more purposeful, and I think it's an element of appeal too. Okay. And let's see. Another thing I noticed is that the initial arrangement of shapes made the ribcage very deflated. What I mean by that is that you have the breast, and the breasts are almost. If you are a viewer and you are noticing this area here, it's like the breasts are pressuring the torso and making it flat. Okay, so obviously the details are supeditated to the forms where they are grounded. Okay, what I mean by that is that in this case the breasts are a detail of the torso or of the rib cage, however you want to see it. But the rib cage should dictate how the shape of the breast should be. It should not be the opposite. Here, for example, the shape of the breast is dictating how the ribcage should look. So that compromises the characteristic nature of the ribcage or the torso in general. Here, I took care of keeping that that inherent shape of the torso. What I mean by that, let me try to do something really quick. It's that the torso, the rib cage, if you were to simplify it, is like an egg shape. For example, here are the last ribs. Here you have the xiphoid process, and you can see an inner plane in this space. So what you have is like an egg, basically. So if you have an egg and it's very rigid, and you have this axis in the front, which is the sternum, and it's also very rigid, and it's the highest point of that egg, that means that your breast should slide off. Sorry, if they are very big, like in this case, they slide to the side, and they remark the shape of the rib cage. They are not compromising the shape of the rib cage; they are adding to it. So I hope you can see that change. That is very, it's a very fundamental one, I think. Okay, another thing that I wanted to do is to push the pose. So that's why you can see in the overpaint that the extremes are more the pose is coming from the left to the right in a more extreme way than in the original. In the original, the pose is a bit mute, it's a bit rigid. So I wanted to push that pose to make it more bold in general. Okay. Another thing that I noticed in the original were the hands. I know hands can be difficult, and it's an element that most of us have had issues. So it's very important that you start very simple. What I mean by that is that you have to come up with a way to simplify your hands. And I hope you can see, for example, in the right one, that what you have in the palm is basically a box. And when I had that box blocked in, I started to modify that box to place the starting point of the fingers. That starting point was dictated by some ellipses. This ellipse is not there. Should not be there. Should be in the other side of the plane. And when you have those ellipses, you can start drawing those fingers. And those fingers, if you notice, are cylindrical, but at the same time, for example, in the case of the index, it's very squarish still. You can see that there are two planes. This is a plane in shadow, and this is a plane in light. So even if I started this hand almost from scratch, I didn't went too complex with it unnecessarily. I just tried to block in basic shapes, basic forms. And one of the things that I try to do with those basic forms is to always try to show two planes. In this case, for example, you have this plane that is catching light, and this other plane that is mostly catching shadow. There are some inner light shapes, like in the case of the tomb side, that you can see there is a small shape of light here. But that's still very simple. And the value is mostly uh, a single shadow value. And another thing that you have to take into consideration to simplify your paintings is to fuse your shadows. And this is a good example of that. You can see how the shadow of the finger and the shadow of the palm and the shadow of the forearm, wrist, they are basically fused into a single shadow shape. There are many landmarks there, but there is an almost uninterrupted shadow shape. So don't try to overcomplicate things. Start from very basic shapes, very basic forms. Try to show at least two sides of that form. And from there, start to build up the details. In the case of the hand, never start from the fingers. Start from the palm and make the palm very boxy. In this case, This is a bit of a trouble because of what I just said. But it's because you are just seeing the fingers. But um, even here, you can see that simplification is still very noticeable. There is a shadow side and a light side, and there is a small value that represents my occlusion shadow, but that's basically it. There is no more to it. Okay. Another thing that, sorry, I forgot to mention is that the fingers should look as they are converging into a single point. That creates a sense of unity. Okay. So as much as possible, because the fingers are obviously very complex, and they might do poses in which you don't have convergence, but as much as possible, try to make the fingers feel like they are converging. Okay. Let's see. Let's get back to the original, and yeah, you can see that convergence is not there. And here, for example, in the other hand, it's very narrow. So you have to take into consideration that the proportion should be taken into consideration too when you are blocking in. That's why starting from basic shape is very make things easier for you, because this kind of change of proportion, when you have already rendered it, you have already um, painted, you're going to have a hard time changing things. You can do that, but you are going to spend more time fixing things up with liquify, and it's never going to look that mm, I forgot the term I was looking for, but try to avoid doing this if possible, of course. If you are noticing something that is wrong and your liquify tool is the best thing at hand, do it. But if possible, from the start, try to use basic shapes to avoid doing things like this. Here, even with liquify, you can see that the proportion was changed and the hand looks a bit better. Anyway, sorry for that tangent, and I think I spent too much time there. Let's go to the ear. I feel the ear is was too low. It was also connected to the jaw. That is something I try to avoid. If possible, I try to leave a gap here. You're going to notice that in the in the overpaint to a point. I have that connection. However, that connection is not very, because I am not using inner lines. It's not very noticeable. So here, for example, in the overpaint, I want to break that and make that separation more apparent. There are individuals that do have an ear that is connected to the jaw, but it's a very rare case. Okay, so yeah, I also made that ear, moved that ear up. Also, I noticed that the ear in the original was too simplified to a fall. So what I did here was to create at least the hint of the anti-helix. The anti-helix is this part here that looks like a white letter. Let me pick another color. Here, this is the anti-helix. And I always keep that in mind, that it looks like a white letter. And here is the helix, that is like the framing of the ear. So if you want to be more, to go into more detail, you have to take into account that the helix is what frames the ear. So you are going to have that framing. And inside that framing, you need to fit your anti-helix, the Y letter. So here in these spaces, you're going to have occlusion shadow, and that's a very characteristic ear. That's you can leave it like the ear like this, or you can go into more detail. But for stylized characters, I suggest you just keep the anti-helix suggested as a shadow shape, and you can check against the thumbnail that the ear still looks very recognizable. Okay, let me check what else. The bows like in the original, I really like that that my patron tried to grab some of that green into the skin, and that makes things more related. And here, for example, I took that bounced light and tried to distribute it along the areas that were in contact with the ball. And the ball itself is catching light from the skin. You can see it in these shapes of color. And that's very easy to do. You just grab the airbrush with very low opacity with the color you want to infuse into the material, and you start painting very carefully. The sky is also bouncing some of that blue light. You can see it here, and into the skin too. Um, let's see what else. The expression in the original seemed a bit unfocused because the gaze, I felt that she was looking to something that was outside of the frame, which is not a bad thing. But if you want to make things more engaging, you can try make your character look at the viewer. In also, I try to make it more playful. Okay, I added the lips. You can see that with the lips that were not present in the original. Yeah, no, they were not present. However, I try to reinforce the light direction. The upper lip is of a darker tone than the upper lip, and that also contributes to the sense of unity in the way the light dictates my rendering, my painting. Let's see what else. Um, mm, mm, mm. I feel that the interactions between different elements, for example, the um, the hand and the ball that were present in the original, I tried to make it to preserve that because it is a good idea to have your character and your elements feel like they are interactive between each other. And this is something I try to remark also with the change in the hand pose. And yeah, I think that that's basically it for for this video. I am going to add a time lapse replay of the process, so you can see it more in a separate fashion from my explanation. In the past, I have tried to record while I have been talking, but it's very challenging. Okay, I am not discarding the idea, but I feel this way despite my faults. It's a bit more concise. It's a bit more engaging to separate the explanation from the process. So yeah, I'm going to add this tiny replay at the end of this video. Anyway, I hope that has been helpful. And if you have any doubts, any questions, if there were points you didn't get, leave me a comment. I will try my best to explain further in your replying to your comment. And yeah, see you later. Thanks for watching. And before before leaving you, please consider subscribing to the Patreon. I have been doing this for a while, and I am also uploading there real-time videos of my process. I am reviewing pieces of mine. This is the first time I review a piece that's not mine, but I hope that has been helpful. And if you want me to review your work, I can do that. I have a tier um, for that very thing. You can submit one piece per week, and if it is okay with you, I can do this kind of video with your piece too. So yeah, please consider it. It's not only the reviews. I have plenty of other things. I upload notes. I upload the PSD files, the time lapses, and I also have some apps that'll help you in your studies. And I have other things that I think you will enjoy. So yeah, see you later. And if you have any doubts, let me know. Bye.